Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode from the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec, and in this video we're going to learn how to play Dutch Resistance Orange Shell Overcome, designed by Marcel Köhler, who has also sponsored the video. It's a cooperative game for 1 to 5 players, so it also plays solo, and here's how it plays. Orange Shell Overcome is a scenario-based game, so first choose a scenario you want to play. It is recommended to start with the first one and then continue in the numerical order. So let me choose the first scenario. This scenario sheet contains the goal of that scenario and the lose conditions. On the other side of the sheet you can find the brief thematic description of the scenario and then the difficulty levels: basic, normal difficulty. Then there's also hard and extreme difficulty. Let's choose the normal difficulty and then follow the setup from the scenario sheet. This is a visual guide how to place the locations on the map, and below that you can find additional instructions for the current scenario setup. Based on those instructions, you will place these location tiles on their designated spaces. Each location has this safety track, and the black cube indicates the current value of that safety. At the start of each scenario, place the black cube above the space with the orange line, or here the light gray line. And note that the starting safety level doesn't have to be the highest possible safety level for that location. It's simply the starting level. Then, based on the instructions from the scenario sheet, place these policeman tokens or soldier tokens on the other side on designated roads. Those roads are marked with a letter. So, for example, in this scenario, for the normal difficulty, place the police tokens on these roads and soldier tokens on these roads. Then prepare the deck of occupier cards. There are two basic sets of occupier cards. Each basic set has the gray border. This is a so-called threat level 1 and this is a threat level 2. Note they have different icons in the top left hand corner. They also have different colors on their back and different pictures. The helmets on these pictures actually match the helmet icons on the front side. Shuffle each deck separately, and from each deck remove the top 4 cards without looking at them and return them back to the box. In a 5-player game, remove only 3 cards from this deck, the Threat Level 1 deck. Then take the occupier cards for the current scenario. They have 2 numbers in the top right hand corner. The first number indicates the scenario and the second number indicates the card number. So 1.1 is the first card from the first scenario. 1.7 is the 7th card from the first scenario. Take the first 4 cards for the scenario. You see the different icons, so take these 4 and shuffle them into this Threat Level 1 deck. Take these second 4 cards and shuffle them into the Threat Level 2 deck. Then finally take the Threat Level 1 deck, put it on top of the Threat Level 2 deck, and take this completed occupier deck and place them on the designated space on the game board. Then these are Halt cards, Patrol cards, Raid cards. Shuffle each deck separately and place it on the designated space on the game board. These are Helper cards. Shuffle the deck, split into 2 decks of 10 cards each, and place the decks face up on these spaces and shuffle these tickets and Ausweis cards, and again place them face down on their space on the game board. Then, based on the chosen difficulty level, set the starting morale value. Here we have 16. So place the morale token on the corresponding space on this morale track, and then these are morale action tokens. Flip the token face up, so this side up, in the space with the current morale value and also in all spaces below. The morale token or tokens which are above the current morale value remain face down. Basically, these tokens are action points you can spend during the round, and the number of these tokens you have available depends on your current morale value. Anything above is face down and not available for the current round. You can place all the remaining components nearby as a general supply. Then each player chooses a color, takes the player board in that color and also player meeple and the current alibi token. And before you start the game, collectively agree whether you're going to play on the standard side or on this easy side. I'm going to demonstrate the game with the standard side. Each player chooses an identity card and takes all the character cards associated with that identity. Usually it's 3 cards, sometimes you can get more. Then based on the starting alibi value, place your alibi token in the corresponding space on your alibi track and place your meeple on a starting location. Usually it's a location printed on your identity card, however in the first scenario all players start in this meeting place. If you play any other scenario and your location is not currently in play, place your meeple again on the meeting place. Finally, determine the starting player. It's the player who demonstrates the highest resistance against authorities, and if you cannot decide, then you can use these numbers on the player board. The player with the lowest number becomes the starting player. That player will take this starting player token. Make sure everyone understands the goal of the scenario, and we're ready to start. Dutch Resistance, Orange Shall Overcome, is a cooperative, scenario-based game in which players assume roles of members of the Dutch resistance during the final years of the World War II. This resistance used the phrase Oranje zal overwinnen, Orange shall overcome. That's where the name of the game comes from. And players work together to complete the scenario goals, which are non-violent forms of resistance such as expanding a network, keeping people safe, moving important objects, and so on. To win the game, all the scenario goals must be achieved, and players lose the game if the alibi of any character drops below 1, or the group morale drops below 1, or when players run out of time, which is measured by this occupier deck. The game is played over a series of rounds, and the number of rounds depends on the number of players in the game. And each round has 4 phases. First 2 phases are called the day period, it's a daytime. In the start phase, players collect their character cards and they draw 1 occupier card. And then in the action phase, players play actions from their character cards. They gather resources and they do all the things that are necessary to win the game. Then in the night time, in the danger phase, the safety in all locations where characters are present lose safety. And finally, in the patrol phase, all the patrols in the city move around the city, which may also cause locations to lose safety or players losing alibi. During the action phase, which is the main phase of the game, players can perform actions on their character cards or standard actions, which are also printed on your player board. Those standard actions are movement, actions in your current location. You can increase the safety of your current location. You can gain information which is required to perform other actions. You can perform specific scenario actions, and you can also exchange materials and resources with other players. Actually, this exchange doesn't cost any action points. As I said, in order to win the game, you have to achieve all the goals of the scenario, and the scenario also lists all the lose conditions. So, without any further ado, let's start with the start phase. During this phase, all players simply take their 3 character cards, and each player also draws 1 occupier card. Take the card from the top of the deck, add it to your hand, but keep that card hidden from other players. You may not even tell other players what's on your occupier card. Then, based on the current moral value, reactivate all the moral action tokens. You don't have to do this in the first round of the game because this is part of the setup. Now we can move to the action phase. Starting with the first player and continuing clockwise, each player has to resolve all 3 of their character cards in any order, and then you must resolve the occupier card, and only then is the next player's turn. That means each player will completely resolve all their cards before the next player can play their turn. However, at any time during the game, any player can use these morale action tokens to take a standard action, even if it's not their turn. However, you have to resolve one card completely before any player can take a standard action with the action token, and then the active player can continue resolving another card. So you cannot take these standard actions during another action. Each action must be fully completed before the next action starts. During one round, you have to spend all these tokens. You may not save them for later rounds. And if the morale drops down during the same round, you don't lose all the active tokens that were active at the start of the round. The current position of the morale token will affect the number of available morale action tokens for the next round. Character cards look like this, and as you can see, there are two types of these character cards. Each card has an action point symbol, and if the card says or, so the standard action or this specific action, you can do one or the other. You may obviously not do both. When you resolve these symbols, you have to resolve them from left to right, and in this case you go from top to bottom. And if the card says and, it means you can do the standard action and also the specific special action. You can do them in any order you want, but this time the standard action is mandatory and the specific action, the special action, is optional. Which means you may decide not to take the special action and only perform the standard action. Also, if you don't meet the requirements of that special action, you may not perform that action. When you resolve the card, you can discard it, flip it face down, whichever method you choose. And you may also decide that you don't want to resolve the card at all, although it's probably not a good idea. But if you do, again, flip it face down and consider that card to be resolved. Once you resolve the third card, you must resolve the occupier card. These are actions of the occupiers in the game, of your opponents, so to say. Usually you have to choose one or the other side of the card, so this is one full effect, this is another one. So the active player chooses which side of the card is going to be resolved. Some occupier cards also contain this kind of effect, which is mandatory. You have to resolve that effect, and then you continue to one of the optional effects on the card. After that, when you resolve all your character cards and the occupier card, the active player's turn is over, and then it's the next player's turn. These moral action point tokens can be used by any player during any other player's turn, but not in the middle of another action. You have to wait until one action is completed and then you can use the action token. During one round, you have to spend all these tokens. You may not save them for later rounds, and if the morale drops down during the same round, you don't lose all the active tokens that were active at the start of the round. The same applies if you increase the morale, you don't get additional action point tokens. The current position of the morale token will affect the number of available morale action tokens for the next round. Now, in the following minutes of the video, I'm going to explain all these icons, all the actions in the game. And by the way, you can find a brief description and brief explanation of all these actions and icons on your reference card. There are 6 standard actions in the game. They are all listed on your player board. In order to take the standard action, you have to use the action point either from the character card or by using one of the active morale action tokens, which are still face up. And we will start with the first action, which is raising safety in your current location. Locations are these tiles on the map, and there are city locations. They have blue icon here. These city locations are located above the river. All the locations below the river with the green icon are called countryside locations. Locations are adjacent if they are connected with the road. Furthermore, there are 5 regions in the game. However, regions correspond to roads rather than locations. Here, for example, we have yellow region with roads marked with letters M, N, O, and P. Here we have the green region A, B, C, and D, blue region E, F, G, H, and so on. We also have the gray region here and purple region. Each location has this safety value. Anytime the safety value drops down, move this black cube to the left. If the safety value is increasing, move it to the right. The safety can never go beyond the maximum value and it will never go below the 0. However, when for any reason the safety of the location drops to 0, you have to resolve raid immediately. Draw the top card from the raid deck and resolve the card for current location. The card has two sections, this first one with the number and the second one with all these effects. This top section is only resolved if the current location contains any item or any person in hiding. If these tokens are not at the location, you can completely skip this first part. You can find these items and persons in hiding in certain scenarios, so they are scenario specific. Now let's say there is an item. First thing you do, you have to roll 2 dice, and if the total value of these dice is equal or higher than the value on the card, nothing happens. However, if the number on the card is higher, remove the token from the location and resolve the negative effects from the scenario sheet. If you don't like the values on the dice, any player, not only the active player, but any player can discard and spend one of these information tokens, and by spending you return it back to the general reserve, and re-roll one of the dice. After you resolve the top card of the card, or if there is nothing to resolve, then continue to the second half and resolve all the remaining effects. Then take the raid card and place it back to the bottom of the raid deck. Finally, restore the safety value of that location back to the starting safety value, which is the orange line or the light gray line. The second standard action is gaining 1 information token. As indicated by this iconology, you gain 1 information token, but your current location loses 1 safety. Remember, it's always the location with your character meeple. Then the third type of the standard action is this location action. Location action is the action printed on the location. In this scenario, some locations are inactive, which means you may not perform this action. When they become active and you move to that location, you may perform this effect. Usually you have to lose something in order to gain something. Anytime you see black circle with the white number, that means you have to spend these tokens. Orange circle with white numbers, that's something that you gain. In this example, you have to spend any 2 resource tokens and you gain 1 resource token and you increase the overall morale by 2. In many locations on the map, you will gain resources. There are 5 types of resources in the game: information, money, rations or food, documents and contacts. Anytime you gain a resource token, place it on this resource track to the rightmost available space. Every time you spend a resource and you return it back to the general supply, slide all the remaining tokens to fill in the empty gaps, because the number of your resources will affect the safety of your current location at the end of the round. There are a couple of specific locations where you gain these special cards. At the Forger location, you can gain the Ausweis card. When you do, place it face down next to your player board. It will remain face down until you resolve that card. You can use it during the movement. I'll come to that in a minute. Similarly, at the station, you gain 2 tickets. Again, place them face down next to your player board until you use them. At the university, you gain 2 helper cards. These helper cards are face up, so you may choose whichever you want. After you resolve the effect of the helper card, put it back to the bottom of the deck, and then you resolve the second one. You can choose the card from the same deck or from the other deck, and after resolving the effect, you can place it face up at the bottom of the corresponding helper deck. There are additional icons you can find on the cards and on the locations. Anytime you have to choose a location in the city area with this icon, you have to roll a die, and based on the number of the die, here we have 4 in the city area, You have to choose that location because here we have number 4 in the city area. This icon indicates the current location of your meeple. This indicates any location of your choice. And here we have the basic resources, and this is an icon for any kind of resource. There are 2 other specific effects: reduce and intensify the road control. When you intensify a road control, if the road is empty, place a policeman marker on the road. Otherwise, if there is a single police marker, flip it to the soldier side. Next time you intensify it, add additional policeman token. Next time you have to intensify it, flip the police token to the soldier side, and so on. When you can reduce the road control, you do the opposite. If there are any soldiers, you can flip one of them back to the police side. Next time, when you can reduce that road control, if there is a police token, you can remove it from the board. With the next reduce action on the same road, you would flip the soldier token back to the police side, and so on. And finally, some effects will allow you to move either the policeman or the soldier to another road based on these signs. The number indicates how many roads that token will be moved, in this case only one road, and the color, black or white, indicates in which direction that token has to move. So for example, if this policeman has to follow the black part of these signs, it shows the letter M, which means the policeman moves to the road with letter M. On the other hand, if this policeman would have to follow the white sign, he would have to move to the road with letter O. Similarly, this police token can either move to the road with letter N, so to this one, or road with letter L, that's this one, which means this patrol can only move along this road. This person will never move to the right or left to this street. It also means that occupiers can move from one region to another, and more than one occupier can be on the same road. Then the next standard action is the movement action. With this action you can use 1 or 2 movement points, and basically every time the icon contains the range from 0 to 2, for example, you may spend 0, 1 or 2 movement points. If the icon contains the specific number, 1 in this case, you must use that number. So here you must use the 1 movement point. With 1 movement point, you can move over one road from one location to another. When you spend more than 1 movement point, for example 2, you have to fully resolve the first movement, and then you can continue and fully resolve the second movement. By resolving the movement, I mean going through these controlled roads. When you move over safe roads, roads without any tokens, any police or soldier tokens, nothing happens, it's safe to move, you don't have to resolve anything. When you move over controlled roads, roads with any number of police or soldier tokens, you have to resolve the Halt card. When resolving the Halt card, draw the top card from the deck. Give the card to another player who reads the text for the active player, and based on this text, which describes the current situation on the road, the active player must make a choice, one or the other choice. The choices are also described in that text. If you play solo, you can simply cover the remaining section of the card with another card or with a blank piece of paper, and after you make a choice, you can reveal the remaining part of the card, and based on the option you have chosen, resolve the card. Again, you can find the description of those icons on your help card, but we have already covered those icons. This one reduces the group morale, this one reduces players' alibi. This is the icon for intensifying the road control, and you intensify the road control for the road you are moving over. These icons reduce the safety in the location you are moving into. However, both options contain 2 different resolutions based on the icon. This is the icon of a policeman, this is the icon of a soldier. Always resolve the effect which corresponds to the highest officer on that road. So if there's only a police on the road, you resolve the icons for the police. If there was a soldier, you resolve the effects for the soldier. So in this case you would resolve this effect. If you choose this option, you would resolve this effect. In this example, since the soldier is the highest officer on the road, you would resolve the effect for the soldier, but if the road would only contain the policeman, regardless of how many policemen are there, you would only resolve this top section or this one depending on the choice you have made. However, each occupier beyond the first one reduces your alibi. Policemen reduce your alibi by 1, soldiers by 2. After resolving the Halt card, return it back to the bottom of the Halt deck. If you have the Ausweis card, you can use it to prevent drawing the Halt card. So when you move from one location to another and you would have to draw the Halt card, you can use your Ausweis card, flip it face up, resolve the effect, return the Ausweis card back to the bottom of the Ausweis deck, and freely move to your destination. One last note, if the current location contains any person in hiding token or item token, you can take one of those tokens with you when you move. After you move, even with the token remains on the next location, it stays on the board, and then either you or another player can move that token to another location and so on. There is another standard action which is a very special type of movement, and that's using this train ticket and move from your current location to any other location on the map. You can ignore all the occupier tokens, you don't resolve any Halt cards. However, you may not move any items or person in hiding tokens with you. Then flip the ticket card face up, resolve the effect on the ticket, and then place it back to the bottom of the ticket deck. And finally, the last standard action is a scenario action. Scenario action is always described on the scenario sheet. In this first scenario, the scenario action is to take the location and flip it to the active side. In order to do that, you have to spend these resources. You have to spend them all during this action. And when you do, the location becomes active and also the location action becomes available. There are other additional effects for this scenario action in the first scenario. Each scenario has this scenario action different, so make sure everyone understands what this specific action does. There is another action which we need to talk about, but this doesn't need any action tokens or action symbols or these morale action points. You can do it for free, and that's exchanging resources between characters. You can only do that if 2 or more characters are in the same location. And then you can exchange tickets, Ausweis cards or resources between these characters. As I said, it doesn't cost any action, but again, you cannot do it in the middle of another action. However, you can do it in between the player's moves during the movement action. For example, if the yellow player performs the movement action, after the first move and potentially after resolving any Halt cards, yellow player can now perform the exchange with the purple player who is now in the same location, and then yellow player can finish the movement action with another move to another location. By the way, these resources or tickets or cards can never be simply left at the location waiting for other characters to pick them up. You must always have these tokens and cards in your possession. After all players have taken their turn during the action phase, the play moves to the danger phase, which affects all the locations with characters. You have to resolve each location separately for each character, and you resolve these effects based on the position of your alibi token and based on the number of resources you have. So for the alibi, if your alibi token is in this range, reduce the safety of your current location by 1. If it was in this area, you would reduce it by 2 and so on. In this case, you would even reduce the overall morale by 1. So here we have to reduce the location safety by 1. And then based on the number of resources of the yellow player, the safety of the current location is reduced by additional 2 spaces, so moving from 4 down to 2. Now do this for all characters in all locations. And for example, if you had 2 characters in the same location, You have to reduce the safety of the location for the first character and then second time for the second character. If the safety of the location drops below 1, resolve the raid at the end of the phase. Don't do it immediately, do it at the end of the phase. That is specifically important for the case when 2 or more characters meet in the same location. If the first character reduces the safety of the location down to 0, you don't resolve raid immediately. You would first reduce the safety for another character, which would have no effect because it's already at 0, and only after all characters are resolved, then you take the raid card and resolve for the locations with the safety at 0. If there's more than one such location, the first player chooses in which order they will be resolved. Then we move to the patrol phase, in which occupiers move, take the top patrol card from the deck, and resolve that card in the current region. In this example, it's a blue region. Fully resolve all the effects on the card. In this example, you would have to reduce the overall group morale, then reduce the safety in one random location in the city area, and then all soldiers in this blue region would move following the white sign, and all policemen would move following the black sign. The card also indicates an action which is taken when there are no soldiers or policemen in the region. When the policeman moves through a location, reduce the safety of that location by 1, and if there was any character in that location, reduce the alibi of that character by 1. If the soldier moves through the location, reduce the safety of that location by 2, and the alibi of the characters in that location by 2 as well. Again, if the safety of the location drops to 0, at the end of this phase, resolve the raid card for each such location. After you resolve the patrol phase, it's the end of the round. The first player marker is moved to the next player clockwise, and then you can start another round. However, if there are no occupier cards in the deck, and the players have not achieved the goals of the scenario, they would lose the game. On the other hand, if you achieve the goal, you win the game. But if the alibi of any characters drops to 0, or if your group morale drops to 0, you lose the game, and that's all you need to know to play Orange Shell Overcome. The game also comes with 2 solo modes and 1 solo variant. The first solo mode uses this group cards. You can play solo with the help of this resistance group, or you can play as a solo with the help of helpers, or my favorite, you can simply play multiple characters, since those characters are resolved one after another. When you take the character cards and you draw the occupier card, don't look at that occupier card, place it face down somewhere next to the player board of that player, and then start resolving the character one by one. And every time you draw a Halt card, you can use another card to simply cover the options, read the text, make decisions, and that's a beautiful way how to play the game even with multiple characters solo. So that's how you play Orange Shell Overcome. If you have any questions or comments, I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can support the channel on the Patreon page. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell. My name is Branislav Berec and hope to see you next time.